Today, we're going to look at the 6 techniques of paraphrasing. As you know, when you're writing your research paper or your academic essay, the vast majority of citations that you use need to be paraphrased. As a general rule of thumb, I like to tell my students maybe one direct quote per essay is acceptable. At the absolute limit, two. You don't want to use too many direct quotes, copying and pasting from the source word for word, because it looks lazy. It shows far more endeavor and initiative to have done the research and then paraphrased it in your own words, but giving the original author credit. It shows that you know what you're talking about, you've understood the point, and are able to put it into different words to support your points. And it shows dexterity in your writing ability. So, as much as you can, paraphrase your outside sources and when you're using them in text citations. Uh, that said, there are 6 ways of doing this. And just from the outset, I'd like to say, in most cases, you will employ 2, 3, 4 of these techniques at the same time. But I want to separate them individually so you have a clear understanding. So let's look at the first technique of paraphrasing, probably the most common, is using synonyms for keywords, using words that have almost the same meaning, and using those as opposed to the original words of the author that you found that you want to use. And we do this because, again, you don't want a direct quote, and you definitely want to plagiarize, so you do need to rewrite it in new words, but without losing the original meaning. So here's an example. Adolescent employees sometimes argue with their employers. If you were to synonymize this, it would become something like this: teenage workers occasionally disagree with their bosses. This is an extreme example, but you can see almost all the words were changed. So adolescent became teenage, employees, workers, sometimes occasionally argue, disagree, and employers became bosses. You don't necessarily need to do it like this, almost 90% of the words changed, but you probably at least want to aim for 60 to 70, maybe 80% of the words changed from the original source into your paraphrased example. Synonyms is probably the most common way of paraphrasing effectively, but it's not the only way. So for technique 2, one that a lot of students don't use, but they should, is making an opposite verb negative. So here's an original example. During winter break, teachers may ignore students' emails. Now we want to look at the verb ignore here, and we want to change it from may ignore into a negative. Now how can we do that? Well, perhaps we could do something like this. During winter break, teachers may not acknowledge students' emails. We've taken the verb ignore, we've looked at the antonym, the opposite, which would be acknowledge, and we want to take may and make it negative, so may not. Hence, may ignore students' emails becomes may not acknowledge students' emails. We've taken the positive, may ignore, and turn it into negative, may not acknowledge. This is a very effective strategy. One that I would recommend you don't use in isolation, you don't just use by itself, combine it with a few of the other techniques, but a very good one that many students don't use. So let's try this by yourself. Corporate sponsors pay female athletes far less than their male counterparts. Now, we want to change the verb pay into a negative. We want to change less and make the opposite. So how do we do that? Can you think? Well, if you said something like this, corporate sponsors do not pay female athletes more than their male counterparts, you'd be correct. We want to take pay and turn it negative to do not pay. And we want to look at the opposite of less, which of course is more. So we end up with corporate sponsors do not pay female athletes more than their male counterparts. Now for technique 3. Technique 3 is you want to make active sentence passive. So here's an active sentence. The principal opened the door to the classroom. In turning it passive, we don't want the principal actively doing the action. We want it to have been done by him or her. And therefore, it would become something like this. The door to the classroom was opened by the principal. So in the original, the principal is doing the action. It's an active sentence. The principal opened the door. But in the revised version, the door to the classroom was opened by the principal. So taking an active sentence and turning it passive is another very effective way of paraphrasing. So can you do this one by yourself? The teacher tutored the student in academic advising 3 days a week. The teacher tutored the student. Now you want to turn that passive. Therefore, the student was tutored by the teacher in academic advising 3 times a week. All right, so we'll try an activity now. Here are 3 examples in the boxes. You've got the original at the top, and I want you to use each technique and try and paraphrase the original using technique 1, 2, and 3. So in number 1, use synonyms for keywords. In number 2, turn the opposite verb negative, and in the third one, make the active sentence passive. All right, so if you said something along the lines for number 1, paraphrasing involves taking experts' writing and rewording it into revising involves taking experts' words and all right, so now let's look at technique 4. Technique 4 is changing nouns into verbs and verbs into nouns. And again, this is a very effective strategy, but one that students don't use very often. So let's look at the original. The teacher helped the student finish her class registration form. We want to look at the noun registration form, and we want to we want to pull out the verb of this. So registration form is used to register for class. So register is the verb we want to use. So if we were turning this noun into a verb, it would be like this. The teacher helped the student register for classes. We've taken registration form as a noun, we've turned it into a verb. This is a very effective strategy. So I'd like you to try it by yourself this time. The students did not do well on the final test. Final test, that's a noun. We want to use the verb form. So maybe something along the lines of, the students did not do well when they were tested for the last time. The students did not do well when they were tested for the last time. Okay, so as you can see, we take a final test and we turn it into tested. Okay, and final became the last time. So taking a noun like test and turning it into the verb form, a very effective strategy. All right, technique 5 is to combine shorter sentences using comma fanboys. Now, if you don't know what comma fanboys is, it's a acronym that we use for coordinated conjunctions, which are small words that combine 2 full sentences together to make a longer sentence. And if you don't know what it stands for, it's comma for, comma and, comma nor, comma but, comma or, comma yet, or comma so. And again, we use these conjunctions to combine 2 small full sentences. It has to be a complete sentence here and a complete sentence here, join them together to make a longer sentence, which again shows good flexibility in writing abilities. So here we've got 2 short sentences. The movie was shot in New York City. Many of the actors moved to New York. We want to join these together. And to do that, maybe we'll use the conjunction so. The movie was shot in New York City, comma, so many of the actors moved to New York. Again, we've taken the 2 original sentences and we've combined them to make one new sentence. It's a longer sentence using comma fanboys. So, try by yourself. The student studied very hard for the midterm. He still failed the test. Now, what of comma fanboys could you use here? Well, there's 2 options. You could use comma but, or you could use comma yet. In my example, I used comma but. The student studied very hard for the midterm, comma but, he still failed the test. All right, and the final technique, technique 6, is changing the word order of the sentence. Again, this is very common and one that you can really use in conjunction with some of the other techniques. So, for example, to fight pests, farmers began to grow genetically modified crops. We're just going to change the word order here to the farmers began to grow genetically modified crops to fight pests. Okay? And if you try by yourself, after nuclear meltdown, the surrounding area is irradiated and cannot be used for farmland. Again, we're just going to flip the word order. The surrounding area is irradiated and cannot be used for farmland after a nuclear meltdown. Once more, this is not something you really want to just use in isolation because you're literally using the exact same words as the original author. That would be plagiarism. But this is one of those techniques that you can combine with synonyms or turning a positive verb negative or any of these of the 6 techniques that we've used to combine them to make your paraphrase. You might end up combining two, three, four, maybe five, possibly even six, unlikely, but maybe three, four, five of these techniques together every time you write your paraphrase for your academic essay or research paper. It's very effective and shows your professor, again, your skill set and dexterity with the English language and your writing abilities if you can combine two, three, four, or five of these paraphrase techniques in order to take the original source material and put it into your words and make it into your original paraphrase to prove the points that you're making in your research paper or essay. So I hope that helps you and you can employ these techniques yourself effectively in your next essay or research paper. So thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.